Well, in the end, Max won his second World Championship, clinched his second World Championship at Suzuka at the Honda Japanese Grand Prix. Fittingly, a lot of Honda personnel there, a lot of support, of course, for Red Bull and Max because of that Honda link and what a great job Honda have done over the years. And the Honda tie with Red Bull, although slightly more tenuous these days, strengthened for this race. We announced that last week with some additional logos on the car, plus Sergio Perez taking on a driver academy role as well for Honda. So congratulations to all concerned, congratulations to Max, to Adrian Newey, the architect of this amazing 2022 Red Bull ground effect car, which in both the wet and the dry has proved to be massively superior to its opposition for most of the year. There were times, of course, at the beginning of this season when the Ferrari looked really quick, but to sustain that pace and also to find the sweet spots of operation and the reliability to match Red Bull was a bridge too far for them. So congratulations again to Red Bull and Max. It was a shortened race. It was a 2-hour race, foreshortened because of a long delay after a first lap, which began from a grid start on intermediate tyres with worsening rain conditions. But because of that, because that start was made, we saw what will probably be the best pass of the year, which was Max Verstappen off the line, again, on the greasy side of the road, the clean side of the road on the in the dry, but in the wet, it was Charles Leclerc in P2 who got the traction away from the line and was on the inside going down into turn 1A, 1B, the all-important sector at Suzuka, which will define in many ways the race because it was going to be very, very difficult to overtake. And Max, with the championship points possibly to think about, a lot of people saying to him all day, all weekend, Max, you can clinch the championship today, down the outside of Charles Leclerc, of all people. I mean, it's one thing to do that to, say, Carlos Sainz, but to Charles Leclerc, down the outside, holding that position, eventually as they came to 1B, for Charles just to have to back away and Max to take the lead and then pull out, and by the end of the lap be leading by 2 to 3 seconds. It was just sublime driving, I thought, incredible track craft. And regardless of what we're going to say next about the wisdom or not of starting the race at that point, about all the other issues that occurred today in Japan, I think that stands alone as the moment of the day. Just absolutely stunning. And if you wanted any visible, tangible, physical proof of Max Verstappen and his 2022 World Championship, it was that moment in Japan. So let's get back to that start. The rain was getting worse. All the teams knew that, the meteorologists knew that, and I guess the race organisers knew that as they went for the grid start. Full marks to Formula One in general, to want to go back to grid starts in the rain. It was something that's been talked about for quite a long time, and we do have more of them. On intermediates was always going to be a big ask as well, because the problem at Suzuka, inevitably, on a circuit where there are lots of undulations and it's relatively old, dare I say it, in design, was going to be standing water. But a grid start was made on intermediates. And if you're at the front, if you're Max Verstappen, it's okay. Charles Leclerc then was in the spray, of course. And of course, the whole spray situation at the moment needs to be seen in the light of the 2022 ground effect regulations and the new 18-inch wheels we're running on. And I'm not sure a massive amount of study would have been done when they were looking at these new regulations in terms of making it easier to follow another car as to what it would be like if it was pouring with rain and they're on intermediates or wets. Obviously not very much, I wouldn't have thought, if any at all. So that's the first point. Secondly, the jury's out, got to use that phrase, I'm afraid, on the effect of the 18 inches in the wet compared with the 13-inch, and equally the effect of the ground effect Venturi. What is kind of known amongst aerodynamicists, and I've been ringing around this morning, is that obviously the wheel wake and the dissipation caused by the effect of the tyres is the dominant factor. But there's no doubt amongst the aerodynamicists to which I've spoken this morning, that the ground effect will have this energy of pushing the spray quite high. And that, of course, has an effect, more effect on some circuits than others, where if it's completely flat and open, like, I don't know, Saudi Arabia, then the rain, if there ever rained there, then the spray wouldn't be particularly bad. But if there are confines to the circuit, and obviously the Nürburgring Spa are classic examples of that, but also Suzuka, because it is quite confined in a lot of areas, and that's why you saw a lot of that spray being contained. Now, whether it's actually worse with the 2022 ground effect cars compared with the 21 car is something for a lot of CAD, complicated CAD work, I think, probably in the future. And whether, and if it is, whether they'll do anything about it anyway is another question, because how many races are held in the wet anyway. But let's just get down to that point, because the worst thing that happened today was that there was a recovery vehicle on the track whilst the cars were still out there. And in the case of Pierre Gasly, still at high speed. Obviously, if Gasly had seen a red or whatever, he wouldn't have been going that quickly. So he was in a very unusual situation, because he'd started from the garage effectively, and then the pit lane, and then had come in behind the safety car, if you like, to change to intermediates, and had gone out again when the whole thing went red. And he was still going at quite high speed when he got to this recovery vehicle on the exit of the hairpin on the right hander there. And that was horrendous. And that was a reminder, of course, of all the terrible things that happened with poor Jules Bianchi. I think there is, I don't want to generalize at all. So let's keep Japan out of this in terms of, a specific individual race. But I think there's a general feeling of overreaction sometimes to wanting to get the car out of position, which is on the track, as out of position as quickly as possible, and to get into a place of safety. And there's no doubt, I think, if you look at the train of events, that the local head of the marshal's post would have had a directive to get that car removed as quickly as possible, because that's what Formula One wants. TV, schedules, the whole world wants things to happen quickly. Look what happened at Monza when they took a long time to get rid of Daniel Ricciardo's car. And I think the way to look at this is not to apportion blame perhaps on Japan now, or on even the marshal that gave the instruction. I think we need to take a 30,000-foot view here. And I don't think we should blame necessarily the FIA and say the FIA needs to get their act together, because, as I say, a lot of this comes from, we've got to do everything as quickly as possible, get the car into a place of safety. And that comes effectively from Formula One more than the FIA. The FIA directed to instill that in the marshals. But I think in the same way now that we have a CEO of an F1 team as well as a team principal, when we used to just have a team manager in effect, you've got two key people. Formula One is branching out with its managerial systems. I think the time has come, and I've mentioned this point before, to have not only a race director and his minions, if you like, but also to have a proper professional team of head marshal, and you could have whatever titles you want, but it's got to be to do with professional ongoing head marshals that are training the circuits in which we race, sometimes 2 to 3 months in advance in every situation. And this is a professionally run team of people. And I think we're doing that so well in so many areas of Formula One. Not to be doing that now is remiss. And of course the answer to that is, well, who's going to pay for all that? Well, I'll tell you who should pay for all that. The Formula One teams and the Formula One business, because it's in their interest to make sure that we have seamless races even when it's wet. And we want to continue to race in the rain. I think if we didn't have that wet start, putting aside all the dramas, we wouldn't have had Max's pass of the year. And we wouldn't have the great races that we talk about now, the Jackie Stewarts at the Nürburgring in '68, the Ayrton Sennas at Donington in 1993, and so on, the great wet races. We wouldn't have those in our history if we just said, right, well, let's make it easy, we just won't race in the rain. Another thing, of course, is that it does rain a lot in Suzuka, so you can look at the calendar and say, well, is there another time of year when we should be holding the Japanese Grand Prix on this amazing circuit, in this amazing country for Formula One? Well, if you look actually at the annual temperatures around that part of Japan, pretty much the same in March, whether you went there from Australia, or in October, whether you go there after Singapore, so it wouldn't make a lot of difference. Singapore, you're always going to get tropical rain. The next circuit where it's likely to rain probably is going to be Brazil, is it not? And we're going to have similar problems there, because there's a lot of undulations, standing waters there in Brazil every year when it rains. There's no doubt about that. And I think now would be the time, rather than everybody saying, what happened at Japan, GPDA, we can't let this happen again, the FIA, you've got to sharpen that. I think what should be happening is that they should be getting a team of professionals together, and right now go to Brazil, and they should be going through rehearsal simulations of what they do in very precise situations, because we can't afford ever to have a recovery vehicle on a racetrack whilst the Formula One cars are going around. It's completely wrong. And You don't need me to say that. Everybody knows that. And that happened again in Japan. And therefore, the system is still not right by any means. So let's look at some of the highlights of the race. Starting again, just got to say it, Max's pass around Charles Leclerc on the outside of the first lap, just outstanding. George Russell was nowhere and had, obviously, like everybody else, zero visibility once the race restarted. They're all on intermediates and the tyres were going off, and he had a brake problem as well. Kept saying same as the Singapore qualifying brake problem. I wonder whether that was a glazed brake situation as well, or if it had glazed brakes in the race at Suzuka, he wouldn't have gone anything like that quickly, but I presume the car was weaving or something like that, just on the verge of glazed brakes. But George showed how to overtake, and you do that around the outside of Yuki Tsunoda in the S's at Suzuka. I don't think Yuki was even in a million years imagining that George Russell was going to do that, because once you're in the S's generally, well, I'm in the S's now, I just could do my thing. And there's George around the outside. And he did the same to Nicholas Latifi as well, who drove really well in the Williams, I thought, held off Lando Norris for far too long, really, in terms of Lando in a McLaren and Nicholas Latifi in a Williams, but did a really good job. But yeah, George, fabulous overtakes. And then we had Sergio Perez catching Charles Leclerc towards the end. I did say yesterday, did I not, that anything can happen, and Sergio looking good for a podium finish yet again. Well, this wasn't for the podium. This, of course, was for P2. And the Ferrari's tyres, as Charles said afterwards, you know, the tyres went off too quickly, as they did in Singapore. But of course, they didn't go off that quickly when they were on intermediates in Singapore. They went off quickly when they were on medium slicks, and Charles overheated them in the second phase of the Singapore Grand Prix. So I think Charles a little bit confused in his mind there, because when he was on intermediates, he was there putting pressure on Sergio for the first phase of the race without any real dramas on the Ferrari. Just couldn't overtake, that was all. Anyway, getting back to the point, the tyres were going off, the fronts went, and then the rears went on the Ferrari, and Charles was on the radio wondering if there was going to be an opportunity to come in for a new set of intermediates. Of course, that was never going to happen, because by now it was effectively only a 40-minute race by the time they had all the delays of waiting around for the rain to ease a little bit. So Sergio, with his tyres in pretty good shape, as they would be, because he drives a Red Bull, and the Red Bull's got all these different things that it can absorb with its aerodynamic efficiency, and making the tyres work is one of those. And I should remind everybody now that Red Bull were unique in the only team to do any sort of fuel long runs in the wet on intermediates on Friday, and it did pay off as predicted. Anyways, they come into the last lap. Sergio's there right behind Charles, and Charles done a really good job in a car that's obviously got zero grip and very little warning it's giving the driver. But as they go into the chicane, he locks up and goes straight on, and Sergio does his normal thing, goes through the chicane, and as Charles rejoins, there's one of these going down towards the line, and Sergio has to move a little bit, and Charles gets across the line first, but then gets a 5-second penalty, which was announced when Checo was being interviewed by Johnny Herbert after the race for the fans. And that effectively, of course, gave the World Championship to Max Verstappen, because Charles finishing second would always ensure, Max didn't get fastest lap, and Max won, would always ensure that the championship went to Austin. But now he was demoted to P3 with that 5-second penalty. Then Max could relax and celebrate having won his second championship in the land of Honda, on their circuit, on the circuit they built. Amazing. So you could say just a very fitting ending to a day which summed up the 2022 World Championship with a Red Bull 1-2. And Esteban Ocon in a similar situation to Charles Leclerc, perhaps not quite as badly, but his tyres gone right off. But he made zero mistakes in front of Lewis Hamilton and finished P4 for Alpine. He qualified ahead of Lewis, and he held that position right to the end. That for sure is the best drive Esteban Ocon has ever put in, and that includes his win, in my view, in Hungary. Just brilliant, particularly as he also beat Fernando Alonso on the day, who came in towards the end of the race because he was a bit bored in traffic, to put on a new set of intermediates, and was really quick and used those intermediates eventually to pass George to finish in P7. But a difficult day for Fernando, with Esteban Ocon going that well in the other car. Really good day though overall for Alpine. Sebastian Vettel drove incredibly well. and which was astonishing, really, bearing in mind what happened at the first corner. There was a vision, actually, before the start of the race, whilst they were standing to attention for the very moving rendition of the Japanese national anthem, of Sebastian and Fernando Alonso sharing an umbrella, shoulder to shoulder. What's the Aston like to drive then? Said, well, it can't be too bad if you go that quick, and so forth. Anyway, the two of them together. And yet, as they go down into the first corner, Sebastian tries to go around the outside of Fernando, who's made a pretty poor start. And being aggressive, he's down the outside. And what does he think Fernando's going to do? Just give him room? Fernando at this moment actually had a car inside him. So Sebastian then went off, speared off into the boondocks, but managed to keep the thing going and rejoin the race, effectively last. And when the race restarted, they all had to start on wets now because they had to do 2 or 3 laps behind the safety car to clear the track of some standing water as much as they could. Sebastian was one of the first to come in, nothing to lose, to switch to intermediates, because it was pretty clear with the rain easing that intermediates were going to be the way to go. So because of that incident, because he was at the back, he was able to come in and do that instant switch. And because of that, he found himself in really good shape at the crossover point and picked up, well, more than 2/3 of the field, and eventually finished in P6 with Fernando Alonso unable to pass him. So that would have been, okay, Fernando, you had me off and now I beat you. So that was a very good day for Sebastian Vettel and Aston Martin. Probably the best day Aston have had all year, if you think about it. So Sebastian 6th, Fernando 7th, and he passed George Russell on the last lap for that position as well. Nicholas Latifi got a point for Williams, finishing 9th. Really good. He was one of the drivers early on, right at the start actually, saying the grip was pretty good, the standing water wasn't too bad, and he was aggressive and he was going for it. And he was passing people early on in the race, and he thoroughly deserved that P9. He's much maligned driver. He hasn't really been the driver that we ever saw in F2 when he was driving for Dams and winning races for Dams. But here at Suzuka, on a really difficult circuit, in incredibly difficult conditions, Nicholas Latifi finished 9th in the points, so full marks to him. And Lando Norris, 10th, scored a point on a very disappointing overall weekend for McLaren and Lando. Daniel dropped like a stone and finished 11th. They finished 10th and 11th, McLaren, with Alpine really shining on this circuit. So that'll be disappointing, particularly as the conditions, the race, the way the race went, sort of, you'd imagine it was all Lando Norris sort of territory, but alas, it was not. The other driver that deserves a bit of a mention, I think, was Mick Schumacher, who was the last to switch from wets to intermediates once the race got going. But for a while out there, he was holding P2, P3, and quite a lot of good people had to pass him, and it took quite a few corners to pass him as well. I thought he drove really well. In the end, he lost so much time that he was nowhere in the results. But good to see Mick doing a nice job in a situation, obviously, where Haas were hoping that they kept him out a little bit longer. The safety car might come out or something and he can get a free pit stop. But that didn't happen. So Max Verstappen won the Japanese Grand Prix. He's clinched the 2022 F1 World Championship. Adrian Newey was there on the day to see that happen. We give our very best wishes for hopefully a speedy recovery to Dietrich Mateschitz of Red Bull, who's not well at the moment. And just big congratulations to all the team for a brilliant season so far, and since the technical directive was enforced at the Belgian Grand Prix immediately after the August break, for just pulling away from the opposition and disappearing into the sunset. Just an amazing job by Red Bull. You can imagine now with Checo on this high. I mean, he's won Monaco, he's won Singapore, he's second now in Japan. He's going to America, which is going to be full of Mexican fans. Then it's the Mexican Grand Prix. You can see Sergio Perez winning a few Grand Prix before this season's out as well. Ferrari had reliability, which was something. They didn't have great time management. Charles Leclerc on the absolute limit. And we had Carlos Sainz, I've got to mention Carlos Sainz, going off on the first lap when they were on intermediates off the grid start at the Eddie Irvine corner. I call it the Eddie Irvine corner, which is not really a corner, on the approach to the hairpin, where nobody ever goes off, really, except Eddie Irvine in 99. But putting that to one side, Carlos did go off. He just moved offline, it looks like, and caught a puddle and aquaplaned off. But other drivers are moving offline and didn't aquaplane off. And it was, what can you say? I've been saying all year, actually I've been saying for the last 3 years, that in terms of steering movements, everything he does with the car, Charles is a little bit softer than Carlos Sainz, and that's what makes the difference. And Carlos had actually got passed pretty comprehensively by Sergio Perez off the line as well. So just to repeat the point, for this driver, the image of which is amazing car control, loves the wet, the son of his father, it is astonishing how he does back away in race situations. And yeah, he got passed by Perez, and then he was moving around trying to stay out of Perez's spray. Then he got the aquaplaning, then he just spun into the tire wall on the left. And it was that debris that, I think it was that debris that Pierre Gasly caught, a bit of the tire wall, and it became a mess after that. So yeah, I think obviously having that stationary Ferrari there was not good either. The pack coming round in front of him was a nasty moment for Carlos Sainz, albeit he was on the grass on the left. And visibility at that point was absolutely terrible. But that obviously was very bad news for Ferrari in terms of a result today. And it was left to Charles to finish what was eventually P3 with that penalty, and Esteban Ocon pretty close to him by the end in P4. So yeah, as I say, Ferrari kind of there grasping fingernails just about still there in the race in terms of trying to go for some race wins. But at the moment, Red Bull just brilliantly good on all types of circuit: fast, medium speed, slow, wet, dry, intermediate wet. They've got it. And that is a sure sign of total dominance and of the genius of Adrian Newey. So congratulations to him again, using that word a lot. But there is no other word really to apply to the Red Bull Honda operation right now, just on top of their game.